Some stories are too chilling to be forgotten. From a remote farmhouse in Germany, hiding dark secrets, to a quiet Iowa town, rocked by a brutal family massacre, and the haunting trail of a sinister group known as the Smiley Face Killers, these true crime tales will leave you questioning everything. Join us as we delve into the terrifying mysteries behind the Hinterkaifeck Murders, the Villisca Axe Murders, and the unsettling legend of the Smiley Face Killers. Brace yourself for a journey into the dark heart of humanity. The Hinterkaifeck Murders are one of the most chilling and mysterious cases in German criminal history. This case is terrifying not only because of the brutal nature of the crimes, but also because it involves an unsolved mystery that still haunts the small town of Weidhofen, Bavaria, to this day. The story begins in the early 1920s in a remote farmhouse called Hinterkaifeck. The Gruber family who lived there consisted of Andreas Gruber, his wife, Casilia, their daughter Victoria, and her two children, 7-year-old Joseph and 2-year-old Casilia. The farmhouse was isolated, surrounded by dense forest and far from the nearest town or neighbor. It was an area that seemed to invite quiet solitude, but that peace was about to be shattered by a horrific series of events. Before the murders, there were strange occurrences around the farm. Andreas Gruber, the family patriarch, had reported hearing footsteps in the attic despite the fact that no one was supposed to be there. He found footprints in the snow leading from the forest to the house, but they suddenly stopped at the back door. The family also discovered that their keys were missing, and objects in their home were moved around without explanation. These unsettling events were enough to rattle the Grubers, and Andreas even considered contacting the police, but he never did. Things grew more bizarre when, just days before the murders, the Grubers hired a new maid named Maria Baumgartner. Maria was eager to take the job, but when she arrived at Hinterkaifeck, she was immediately struck by the eerie atmosphere of the house and the disturbing tension within the family. She would later report that she felt uncomfortable from the moment she set foot on the property, but she decided to stay. On March 31st, 1922, something unspeakable happened at Hinterkaifeck, something that would leave everyone stunned. On the night of March 31st, a violent and brutal massacre took place. It's believed that the killer or killers arrived at the farmhouse in the evening and began their assault on the family. They murdered Andreas Gruber, his wife Casilia, their daughter Victoria, and her two children with a mattock, a type of axe. The killer struck swiftly one by one, bludgeoning them to death in their beds. The murders were so brutal that even Victoria's 2-year-old daughter Casilia was not spared. What was even more horrifying was what happened next. The killer did not immediately flee the scene. Instead, it seems the murderer stayed in the house for several days, hiding in the attic. Over the next few days, the killer would engage in strange and disturbing behavior. For example, the murderer used the family's resources to live inside the house for days, even feeding and caring for the animals. The bodies of the Gruber family were discovered 4 days later, on April 4th, when the neighbors became concerned after the family had not been seen for a while. The neighbors went to the farmhouse only to find the horrific scene inside. The house was eerily quiet. The bodies of Andreas, Casilia, Victoria, Joseph, and little Casilia were lying lifeless in their beds. The family dog, who had been left tied outside, was also found dead. Strangely, no sign of struggle was found within the house. It seemed that the victims had been caught by surprise while they slept, unable to defend themselves. However, what truly made this case so terrifying was the strange behavior of the murderer. Whoever had committed the crimes was not in a rush to escape. The killer had stayed in the house for several days, using the Gruber family's food, sleeping in their beds, and even using the family's personal items. What seemed like a cold, calculated killing spree quickly turned into a haunting mystery, with authorities puzzled about the motivations and the method of the attack. The investigation into the Hinterkaifeck murders was extensive, but ultimately unsuccessful. There were no clear suspects, and the killer's motives remained unclear. Even the authorities were baffled by the disturbing details of the case. One of the key pieces of evidence was the discovery of the killer's footprints in the snow leading from the forest to the house. The footprints, however, did not show the killer's return to the forest after the crime, suggesting that the killer had been staying inside the house for days. The authorities discovered that there was no evidence of a break-in, leading investigators to wonder if the murderer had been someone from within the family, or someone who knew the family intimately. The local police were unable to come up with any answers. The only clue they could find was a mysterious set of keys that were found in the pocket of one of the victims. The keys led to a shed, which had been locked before the murders. No one could understand how the keys came into the possession of the killer, or why the shed remained locked even after the massacre. Many theories have been proposed regarding the Hinterkaifeck murders. Some suggest that the killer was a deranged stranger who came to the house from the surrounding woods, possibly with a grudge against the Grubers. Others speculated that the killer may have been someone familiar with the family, perhaps even someone living nearby. One of the more disturbing theories is that the killer may have been a family member. A popular theory suggests that Victoria Gruber's daughter, who had a known romantic relationship with a man named Lorenz Schlittenbauer, may have been involved in a love triangle. Some believe that Schlittenbauer, who had a history with Victoria, may have killed the family after a dispute. However, this theory was never proven. Despite these theories, no definitive answers have ever emerged. The killer was never caught, and the case remains unsolved. The deaths of the Gruber family became an unspeakable tragedy, and the haunting memory of the murders continues to linger over the region. To this day, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain one of the most chilling unsolved crimes in history. The farmhouse was abandoned after the murders, and the location is now a haunted site for locals and tourists alike. The case has inspired countless documentaries, books, and articles, but the identity of the killer has never been confirmed. The Villisca Axe Murders, which occurred on the night of June 9, 1912 in the small town of Villisca, Iowa, are one of the most terrifying and perplexing unsolved murders in American history. The brutal slaying of 8 people, including 6 children, has haunted the town for over a century. To this day, the mystery of who committed this horrific crime remains unsolved, leaving behind only chilling questions and eerie suspicions. The victims of the Villisca Axe Murders were the Moore family, Josiah Moore, 43, his wife Sarah, 39, and their 4 children, Herman, 11, Mary, 10, Arthur, 7, and Paul, 5. They had invited 2 young guests over for the night, Lena and Ina Stillinger, ages 12 and 8, who were close friends of the Moore children. The 2 families were well known and respected in the small town, and there was no reason to suspect any danger. That night, Josiah and Sarah Moore tucked their children into bed, along with their guests, and went to sleep in their own room. All seemed normal, but in the dark of the night, a brutal attack was about to unfold. The killer, or killers, crept silently into the Moore home in the dead of night, armed with an axe. The details of the murders are both chilling and disturbing. The killer began with Josiah and Sarah Moore, murdering them in their sleep with blows to the head. The attacker then moved to the children's rooms, killing them one by one in a similarly violent manner. What was truly horrific about the killings was the methodical nature of the crime. The axe used to murder the victims was left beside the bodies, and the killer covered the faces of the dead with sheets. Afterward, the murderer didn't immediately leave the scene but stayed inside the house. They extinguished the lanterns, left the doors closed, and locked the windows, as if they were trying to make the crime go unnoticed. The murderer then sat down to eat some of the food left in the kitchen, and even covered the mirrors in the house, adding an unsettling layer of ritualistic behavior to the already brutal crime. The next morning, the Moore family's neighbor, Mary Peckham, became concerned when she noticed that the Moore children had not gone to church, which was unusual for the devout family. She went to the house and discovered the gruesome scene. The authorities were immediately alerted, and the entire town of Villisca was rocked by the news of the brutal murders. The investigation into the Villisca Axe Murders was swift, but the mystery surrounding the crime deepened as the days passed. The scene was a gruesome one. 8 lifeless bodies, all brutally murdered in the same manner, and no clear suspect in sight. There were several key pieces of evidence that puzzled investigators. The killer had not only used an axe to carry out the murders, but had also covered the faces of the victims with sheets. The killer had also wiped the axe clean of fingerprints, suggesting that they knew what they were doing. Moreover, there were no signs of forced entry, leading police to believe that the murderer had been someone the family knew. The doors and windows were locked from the inside, and there was no indication of a struggle. This suggested that the killer had gained access to the house without arousing suspicion, making it likely that they were familiar with the Moore family's routine. Despite an exhaustive investigation, the authorities were unable to identify the killer. Numerous suspects were questioned, but no concrete evidence ever emerged. The case went cold, and the people of Villisca were left with more questions than answers. Over the years, several theories have been put forward regarding the Villisca Axe Murders. One of the most prominent suspects was a man named Reverend George Kelly. Kelly was a traveling preacher who had visited Villisca around the time of the murders. He had been seen acting suspiciously in the area, and he was known to have a history of mental instability and violent outbursts. Some believed that Kelly may have been the killer, but there was never enough evidence to charge him. Another theory involves the possibility of an earlier attack that was connected to the Villisca murders. A similar killing had taken place in the nearby town of Paola, in Kansas, just a few months before the Villisca Axe Murders. The killer in that case had also used an axe and killed an entire family. Some believe that the same killer may have been responsible for both crimes, but this theory remains speculative. One of the most disturbing theories surrounding the murders is that the killer may have had a personal connection to the Moore family. Some speculated that Josiah Moore had an affair, and the killer may have been motivated by jealousy or revenge. However, there was no solid evidence to support this theory either. The Villisca Axe Murders left an indelible mark on the town of Villisca. The Moore house where the murders took place remained vacant for many years after the crime, and many locals believed that it was haunted by the spirits of the victims. The house still stands today and has become a popular, albeit eerie, tourist attraction for those interested in the paranormal and unsolved mysteries. Over the years, various people have attempted to uncover the truth about the Villisca Axe Murders. Books, documentaries, and TV specials have all sought to shed light on the crime, but the identity of the killer has never been discovered. Despite advances in forensic technology, the case remains unsolved, leaving a dark shadow over the small Iowa town. The mystery continues to captivate true crime enthusiasts, and the horror of the Villisca Axe Murders remains as chilling today as it did in 1912. As time passes, the question lingers. Who was the person capable of committing such a brutal, senseless act, and why did they never get caught? For years, a chilling and unsolved mystery has haunted the families of young men found dead in rivers across the United States. The victims, all college-age and seemingly healthy, were discovered after nights out drinking, often with no clear explanation of how they ended up in the water. What makes these deaths even more unsettling is the strange symbol that's been found near some of the bodies. A smiley face, drawn or spray-painted. Could it be a coincidence? Or is there something more sinister at play? The story of the Smiley Face Killers, a suspected serial killer group, began to take shape in the late 1990s and early 2000s, when detectives noticed an unusual pattern. Over 24 young men, mostly college students, had been found dead in rivers or lakes, often in major cities like New York, Chicago, and Minneapolis. Their deaths were initially classified as accidental drownings, typically after a night of heavy drinking. Yet, as the numbers grew, the cases began to feel less like tragic accidents and more like something far more calculated. It all started in 1997, when two retired detectives, Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, began looking into what they believed were more than just random drownings. Gannon, a former NYPD detective, had a personal connection to the case. His nephew, a 21-year-old college student, had disappeared after a night out and was later found dead in a river under strange circumstances. This loss fueled his desire to investigate similar deaths. As Gannon and Duarte delved deeper into the case, they began noticing several eerie similarities. Most of the victims had been college students, often from well-known schools, and were found in the water after disappearing under mysterious circumstances. What caught the detectives' attention even more were the smiley face graffiti or markings that appeared near several of the bodies. The images were usually drawn on walls near the riverbanks, sometimes on trees, bridges, or nearby buildings. The symbols were eerily similar, a classic smiley face, often with a big menacing grin. This pattern raised red flags for the detectives. They began to theorize that the smiley faces weren't just random graffiti, but possibly a calling card of the killer, or killers. They suspected that the deaths were part of a larger coordinated effort that was targeting young men, making the case all the more terrifying. As Gannon and Duarte pushed forward, they found even more chilling connections. The victims, although initially presumed to have drowned accidentally, showed signs of being dragged into the water after being knocked unconscious or drugged. Many of the men had been out drinking, but their injuries suggested that they hadn't simply fallen into the water. They had been attacked and left to drown. The detectives identified at least 40 cases across several states that fit this troubling pattern, with the earliest as far back as 1997. In many cases, the victims were discovered in rivers or lakes that were far from where they had last been seen. Sometimes the men's clothing would be missing or disheveled, and there were often no witnesses to their last moments. No one seemed to know what happened during the critical hours leading up to their deaths. Gannon and Duarte hypothesized that a group of killers might be working together to target vulnerable young men, abducting them after they had been drugged or attacked, and then leaving them to drown. The smiley face graffiti, they believed, was not just a mark of their killings, but a symbol of their sadistic triumph over the victims, an eerie signature left behind to taunt law enforcement. When Gannon and Duarte first presented their theory, many law enforcement agencies were skeptical. The idea that a group of killers could be operating across multiple states, targeting college students, seemed far-fetched. Most of the drownings had been classified as accidental, and the smiley face symbol could easily be explained away as random vandalism. However, as more bodies were discovered and more reports of strange smiley face graffiti came in, some began to take the theory seriously. Gannon and Duarte's theory received further attention when they linked a series of deaths in the Midwest to the same patterns. But it wasn't enough to convince the public or the authorities to fully embrace the idea of a serial killer operation. Despite the mounting evidence, there was little tangible proof to connect the deaths directly to any one person or group. Investigators could find no concrete links between the victims, no shared location or time of death. No definite pattern that could conclusively prove the involvement of a killer or killers. And so, the smiley face killer theory was left in limbo, with investigators split between believing it was a coordinated killing spree or simply a bizarre series of coincidences. As years passed and the deaths continued, more theories emerged, some more disturbing than others. One of the most common speculations was that the smiley face symbol was not just a signature but also a clue, a way for the killers to boast about their crimes and to create fear and confusion. The idea that a group of killers was operating under the radar for years, all while leaving behind this eerie symbol, sent chills down the spine of anyone following the case. Another theory proposed that the killers could be serial murderers who enjoyed tormenting law enforcement and the families of their victims. Some suggested that the killers were well organized, perhaps even involved in the underground world of organized crime, and that they operated with terrifying precision. Others speculated that the smiley face killers may have been local to the areas where the deaths occurred, taking advantage of their familiarity with the landscape to commit their gruesome acts. One chilling theory even claimed that the smiley face symbol itself might have been a warning, something that let the victims know they were being watched, a symbol that would haunt them as they partied and drank on the edges of danger. To this day, the smiley face killer theory remains one of the most unsettling, unsolved mysteries in modern true crime. While some experts dismiss the idea as a conspiracy theory, others are convinced that the killers are still out there, hidden in plain sight. The mysterious connection between these deaths and the haunting smiley face symbol continues to baffle investigators and captivate those who dare to look into the case. As more bodies continue to surface and the number of strange smiley face sightings grows, it's clear that the story of the smiley face killers is far from over. Whether it's a group of sadistic serial killers, a twisted underground network, or just an unsettling coincidence, one thing is certain: the mystery of the smiley face killer remains a dark, haunting chapter in the history of American crime. Thanks for watching. Good nightmares and stay scared.